He could have called security. He could have turned her away. But instead, he opened the gate, changing both of their lives forever. At first, it seemed like a simple act of kindness. A meal, a warm bed, a safe place to stay. But then she whispered something no one expected. "My mommy said, 'You're my daddy.'" Now secrets from the past are colliding with the present. A powerful man who thought his heart was locked away forever, and a broken girl who may be the key to his redemption. But not everyone wants them together. Dark voices from her past resurface. Lies, greed, and judgment threaten to tear them apart. What happens when the truth comes out? Can love survive the weight of betrayal? Or will this unlikely bond be destroyed before it even begins? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you. Make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Sleek black Mercedes purred along the moonlit drive as Jacob Whitfield returned from yet another tedious charity gala. His weathered hands gripped the leather steering wheel, knuckles white with tension. These events always left him drained, forcing smiles and small talk with people who only saw his bank account. The familiar sight of his mansion's iron gates came into view, their elaborate scrollwork casting long shadows in his headlights. But tonight, something was different. There, huddled against the cold metal bars, was a small figure wrapped in what looked like a threadbare blanket. Jacob's first instinct was to reach for his phone. His finger hovered over the security speed dial, ready to have this unwanted visitor removed. But then he heard it, a soft, frightened whimper carried on the night breeze. "Please, don't send me away again." The words were barely a whisper, spoken in sleep, but they pierced straight through his carefully constructed walls. He lowered the phone slowly, studying the sleeping form more carefully through his windshield. It was a young girl, probably no more than 14 years old. Her face was round, her body heavy set, and even in sleep, there was a sadness etched across her features that made his chest tighten unexpectedly. Jacob sat there for a long moment, engine idling. The emptiness of his massive home seemed to echo in his mind. 32 rooms, all silent save for his own footsteps. When was the last time anyone had needed him? Really needed him, not just his money or his influence. The girl shivered in her sleep, pulling the thin blanket closer. Without conscious thought, Jacob found himself stepping out of his car. The night air was crisp, carrying the first hint of autumn. His expensive leather shoes crunched on the gravel as he approached. "Stand down," he spoke firmly into his phone, addressing the security team he knew would be watching through the cameras. "I'll handle this myself." Getting closer, he could see tears staining her cheeks. What had driven her to seek shelter at his gate, of all places? The girl, Emily, he would soon learn, stirred slightly as he keyed in the gate code. The heavy iron began to swing open with a soft mechanical hum. Emily's eyes fluttered open, wide with fear as she registered his presence. She scrambled to her feet, backing away slightly, but something in Jacob's expression must have reassured her because she didn't. "Run, it's all right," he found himself saying, his voice gentler than it had been in years. "You can't stay out here in the cold." Emily clutched her blanket tighter, looking up at him with a mixture of terror and desperate hope. Jacob extended his hand, moving slowly as if approaching a frightened animal. After a moment's hesitation, she took it, her small fingers trembling in his steady grip. Together, they walked through the gates, leaving the darkness of the night behind them. Emily's relief was palpable, though fear still lingered in her eyes. For the first time in decades, Jacob felt something crack in his carefully guarded heart. A small fissure letting in warmth he'd long forgotten existed. Inside the vast dining room, shadows danced across dark wood paneling as Jacob gestured toward the elegant table. "Please sit," he said, his voice gentler than before. "Mrs. Henderson always keeps something warm in the kitchen." Emily stood frozen, her oversized sweater hanging loosely on her frame. Her eyes darted between Jacob and the polished mahogany chair as if expecting a cruel joke. The chandelier's soft light revealed dark circles under her eyes and worry lines too deep for someone so young. "I don't want to make a mess," she whispered, tugging at her sweater's frayed edges. Jacob disappeared into the kitchen, returning moments later with a steaming bowl of homemade soup and fresh bread. "Eat," he said simply, placing the food before her. Emily's hands trembled as she picked up the spoon. The first bite was hesitant, but hunger soon took over. She ate with desperate intensity, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. "When did you last eat properly?" Jacob asked, his stern expression softening. Emily paused, bread halfway to her mouth. 2 days ago, maybe. At the foster home, she swallowed hard. They said I needed to learn portion control. That no one would want a fat girl like me. Jacob's jaw tightened. "These foster parents, they hurt you?" "Not with hitting," Emily said quickly. "Just words. Lots of words. And rules about food. And the other kids," her voice cracked. "They made sure everyone at school knew I was the fat foster kid nobody wanted." "You have no other family? No one to call?" Emily shook her head, her shoulders slumping. "My mom died when I was little. Never knew my dad. Been in the system ever since." Jacob stood abruptly, pacing the length of the dining room. His footsteps echoed in the silence. Finally, he turned to her. "The guest bedroom in the east wing is made up. You can stay there tonight. We'll figure things out in the morning." Emily's spoon clattered against the bowl. You'd let me stay here?" Her voice broke as fresh tears spilled over. "But you don't even know me." "One night," Jacob said firmly, though his eyes had softened considerably. "Just until we can sort this out properly." Emily's sobs grew harder, years of pain and loneliness pouring out. "Thank you," she managed between gasps. "Thank you so much." Later that night, Jacob sat alone in his study, a glass of untouched scotch on his desk. In his hands, he held a worn photograph, a young woman with warm eyes and a gentle smile. Grace. He hadn't looked at her picture in years, but something about Emily had compelled him to dig it out. There was something in the girl's eyes, a familiar shape, a certain way they crinkled when she gave that tentative smile. It stirred memories he'd buried long ago, of summer days and whispered promises, of dreams that had slipped through his fingers like sand. Golden morning light streamed through the tall windows of the mansion, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floors. Jacob, already dressed in his usual crisp suit, paused in the library doorway. There stood Emily, her fingers gently trailing along the spines of leather-bound books, with a look of wonder on her face. "Good morning," Jacob said softly, not wanting to startle her. Emily jumped slightly anyway, withdrawing her hand as if caught doing something wrong. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "The books, they're so beautiful. No need to apologize. Would you like to join me for breakfast?" Jacob gestured toward the dining room, where Mrs. Henderson had already set out a spread of fresh fruit, pastries, and steaming coffee. Emily nodded, following him with small, careful steps. She settled into a chair, her eyes wide at the abundance of food before her. Jacob noticed how she waited until he began eating before reaching for a croissant. "Tell me about yourself." "Emily," Jacob said, trying to keep his voice gentle. "How long have you been in foster care?" Emily tore tiny pieces from her croissant, her shoulders hunched. "Since I was 6, she said quietly. "I've been in 4 different homes," she paused, swallowing hard. "Nobody ever wants to keep me long." Jacob felt something twist in his chest. "Why is that?" "They say I eat too much. That I'm too quiet. Too fat." Her voice grew smaller with each word. "The kids at school, they call me names. The foster parents get tired of dealing with it." Jacob set down his coffee cup, studying the young girl before him. Despite her size, she seemed to be trying to make herself as small as possible. There was something achingly familiar about her vulnerability, about the way she held herself as if expecting rejection at any moment. A protective feeling washed over him, surprising in its intensity. Before he could respond, Emily spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "My mommy told me once." She took a shaky breath. "You're my daddy." Jacob's hand clenched around his coffee cup. The morning's peaceful warmth suddenly shattered. His mind raced through possibilities, through faces from his past, through years of carefully maintained distance from emotional entanglements. Emily looked up at him, her eyes filled with equal measures of hope and fear, while Jacob sat frozen, his knuckles white against the porcelain cup. Shaken to his very core, Jacob paced his mahogany-lined study, his footsteps echoing against the hardwood floors. The morning sun cast long shadows through the tall windows as his mind raced with possibilities. Could Emily truly be connected to Grace? Those familiar eyes, that gentle spirit, it stirred memories he'd buried decades ago. He paused at his desk, picking up the silver-framed photograph he kept hidden in the top drawer. Grace's smile beamed back at him, frozen in time. The resemblance to Emily was uncanny. After all these years of wondering what happened when Grace vanished, could this be the answer? Making his decision, Jacob picked up his phone and dialed his attorney. "Richard, I need you to arrange DNA testing," discreetly. He listened to the response, nodding. "Yes, as soon as possible." Outside his study window, he noticed Mrs. Patterson from next door peering over the garden fence, clearly trying to catch a glimpse of his young guest. Word had spread quickly through the wealthy neighborhood about the mysterious girl at the Whitfield mansion. He could already imagine the gossip circulating through their social circles. Later that afternoon, Jacob found Emily in the kitchen, her shoulders hunched as she hurried past two whispering maids. Her eyes were downcast, hurt evident in her expression. "Emily," he called gently, "would you join me in the library?" She followed him silently, perching nervously on the edge of an armchair. "I want you to know that you're safe here," Jacob said firmly. "Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Emily's tension seemed to ease slightly. She reached into her bag and pulled out a worn sketchbook. Would you like to see my drawings?" Jacob settled into the chair across from her as she carefully opened the book. Page after page revealed detailed sketches, landscapes, animals, and portraits rendered with surprising skill. "These are remarkable," Jacob said softly, watching her face light up at the praise. "Drawing helps me feel better when I'm scared or sad," she explained, her voice growing stronger. "I can create beautiful things, even when everything else feels ugly." Their moment was interrupted by Mrs. Henderson announcing the arrival of a courier. Jacob's heart thumped heavily. This would be the first step toward answers. He stood in his study doorway, watching as Emily cooperatively allowed the medical technician to swab her cheek. The courier carefully sealed the samples in labeled containers, along with Jacob's own specimen collected moments earlier. As the courier drove away through the iron gates, Jacob remained in the shadows of the hallway, observing Emily as she returned to her sketching by the library window. His chest felt tight with conflicting emotions, hope that she might truly be Grace's daughter, dread at the possibility of disappointment. The weight of decades of questions pressed down on him as he waited for truth to finally emerge. That evening, Jacob's sleek black car pulled into the parking lot of May's Diner, a modest establishment on the outskirts of town. The neon sign buzzed softly in the growing dusk, casting a warm pink glow across Emily's nervous face. She fidgeted with the hem of her oversized sweater as Jacob opened the car door for her. Inside, the diner's bell chimed as they entered. Heads turned, and whispers followed. Emily could feel the weight of judgmental stares. The wealthy Jacob Whitfield, known to everyone in town, dining with a disheveled, overweight teenager. She hunched her shoulders, trying to make herself smaller. "Table for two," Jacob announced firmly, meeting the curious gazes with a stern look that made people quickly turn away. The waitress led them to a corner booth, and Emily slid into the vinyl seat, keeping her eyes fixed on the laminated menu. "Order anything you'd like," Jacob said kindly. noticing how she only looked at the salad section. "The burgers here are excellent." "I shouldn't," Emily whispered, her cheeks flushing. "People already think." "People can think what they want," Jacob interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "You're hungry, and you're growing. Order what makes you happy." When the waitress returned, Emily hesitantly ordered a cheeseburger with fries. Jacob's approving smile made her sit a little straighter as they drove home through the darkening streets. Streetlights casting rhythmic patterns across the dashboard, Emily gathered her courage. "Mr. Whitfield?" Her voice was small but clear. Will you send me back if the test says no?" Jacob's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He pulled the car over to the side of the road and turned to face her. "Emily, listen to me carefully. No matter what that test says, you have a home with me for as long as you want it. I won't send you back." Tears welled in Emily's eyes, and a tiny smile tugged at her lips. For the first time since she'd arrived, hope flickered in her heart like a sturdy flame. When they finally reached the mansion, Jacob stopped the car at the gates. His gaze traveled up the iron bars where he'd found Emily just days ago, curled up and afraid. Now watching her walk ahead of him toward the house, he realized his life would never be the same. The thought both thrilled and terrified him. Standing there in the growing darkness, Jacob faced the question that had been building in his heart. Could he, at 68 years old, truly become the father this girl needed? After decades of living alone, protecting his heart behind walls, as solid as those surrounding his estate, was he capable of being the parent Emily deserved? The iron gates closed behind them with a familiar clang, but this time, the sound seemed different, less like a barrier and more like the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. Sunlight streamed through the bay windows of the mansion's elegant dining room as Emily sat down for breakfast. The chef, following Jacob's explicit instructions, had prepared a colorful spread of fresh fruit, whole grain toast, and a perfectly cooked vegetable omelette. The kind-faced housekeeper, Mrs. Chun, poured Emily a glass of fresh orange juice with a warm smile. "Good morning, Miss Emily. I hope you slept well," Mrs. Chun said softly. "Mr. Whitfield wanted to ensure you had a proper breakfast to start your day." Emily's eyes widened at the beautiful presentation. Never in her life had someone prepared such a thoughtful meal just for her. She picked up her fork with trembling fingers and took a small bite of the omelette. The flavors danced on her tongue. Fresh herbs, tender vegetables, and fluffy eggs cooked to perfection. Jacob entered the dining room, already dressed in a crisp suit. "How's breakfast, Emily?" he asked, his usual stern expression softening as he watched her enjoy the meal. "It's amazing," Emily replied shyly. "Thank you. I've arranged for someone to come by later today," Jacob said, sitting down across from her. "Her name is Sarah, and she's a personal trainer who specializes in working with young people. She's very kind and understanding." Emily's fork froze halfway to her mouth, her shoulders tensing. Past experiences with gym teachers and coaches flashed through her mind, the cruel comments, the public humiliation. Seeing her distress, Jacob quickly added, "This isn't about changing who you are, Emily. It's about helping you feel strong and healthy. Sarah knows that kindness comes first. If you're ever uncomfortable, we'll stop immediately." Later that morning, Sarah arrived. She was a petite woman with laugh lines around her eyes and a gentle demeanor that immediately put Emily at ease. Their first session focused on simple stretches and light movement, with Sarah constantly checking in on Emily's comfort level. "Remember, we're not racing anyone," Sarah encouraged as Emily practiced basic yoga poses. "This is about feeling good in your own body." Though Emily struggled with some movements, Sarah's patience never wavered. By the end of the session, Emily felt a surprising sense of accomplishment. During the next few days, Jacob noticed Emily doodling on napkins and notepads around the house. Her sketches showed remarkable talent, delicate lines capturing the mansion's architecture, the garden's flowers, even the family cat dozing in sunbeams. "These are quite good," Jacob remarked, examining one of her drawings. "Would you like to take proper art lessons?" Emily's face lit up. "Really? You mean it?" Jacob arranged for an art teacher to visit 3 times a week. As Emily learned proper techniques and explored different mediums, her confidence grew. She spent hours in the mansion's sunroom, which Jacob had converted into a small studio space for her. The bond between them strengthened with each passing day. Jacob found himself looking forward to their evening conversations, where Emily would share her progress in both exercise and art. Her smile, once so rare, began appearing more frequently. One evening, Emily approached Jacob in his study, holding a large piece of paper behind her back. I made something for you," she said hesitantly. She revealed a charcoal sketch of the portrait that hung in the main hallway, Jacob's mother, captured in stunning detail. Every line spoke of care and attention, from the gentle curve of his mother's smile to the warmth in her eyes that Emily had somehow managed to capture perfectly. Jacob stared at the drawing, his throat tight with emotion. Tears welled in his eyes as he traced the familiar features his mother's face, rendered with such love and skill by this young girl who had entered his life so unexpectedly. The old wooden doors of First Presbyterian Church creaked as Jacob and Emily stepped inside on Sunday morning. It had been 15 years since Jacob had last attended services here, and the familiar scent of polished pews and worn hymnals brought back a flood of memories. Emily stayed close to his side, her new blue dress making soft swishing sounds as she walked. Whispers rippled through the congregation like wind through tall grass. Some faces lit up with welcoming smiles, while others turned away with barely concealed judgment. Mrs. Peterson, who had known Jacob since he was a boy, beamed and waved from her usual spot in the 3rd row. "Jacob Whitfield, as I live and breathe," she exclaimed warmly. "And who is this lovely young lady?" Before Jacob could answer, a harsh whisper carried from somewhere behind them. "That's the girl he took in. Did you hear about it?" Emily's shoulders hunched slightly, but Jacob placed a gentle hand on her back. "This is Emily," he said clearly, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We're very happy to be here today." They settled into a pew near the middle of the church. The pastor began his sermon, his voice filling the sacred space with words of hope and redemption. "God's forgiveness knows no bounds," he proclaimed. "Every one of us deserves a second chance at life, at love, at family." Jacob felt the words pierce straight through his carefully constructed walls. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the pew in front of him. All those years of isolation, of pushing people away, had he been waiting for his own second chance without even knowing it? A small group of children sitting in the row ahead turned around, curiosity bright in their eyes. A girl about Emily's age with copper-colored braids smiled warmly. "Want to come sit with us?" she whispered, gesturing to their row where several kids had scooted over to make room. Emily looked up at Jacob questioningly. He nodded encouragingly, though his heart clenched at letting her go even these few feet away. As Emily carefully made her way to join the other children, he heard stifled giggles from a group of teenagers in the back corner. Their pointed looks and whispered comments made his jaw tighten, but he forced himself to stay calm. When Emily glanced back at him uncertainly, he gave her a proud smile and a thumbs up. Her answering smile, small but real, made his heart swell. She turned back to her new friends, who were showing her their favorite songs in the hymnal. As the service drew to a close, Jacob helped Emily gather her things. The morning sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across her face. Looking at her, Jacob felt overwhelming gratitude wash over him. "Thank you," he whispered skyward, too quietly for anyone else to hear. "Thank you for bringing her to my gate that night. Thank you for giving us both another chance." The morning sun streamed through the dining room windows as Jacob and Emily sat across from each other, picking at their breakfast. Neither had much appetite. Emily pushed her scrambled eggs around her plate while Jacob stirred his coffee for the 100th time. the spoon clinking nervously against the china. "The courier should be here any minute," Jacob said softly, trying to keep his voice steady. Emily nodded, her hands fidgeting with her napkin under the table. The doorbell's chime made them both jump. Thompson, the butler, appeared moments later with a crisp white envelope on a silver tray. "The DNA results have arrived, sir," he announced formally, though his usual stoic expression betrayed a hint of anticipation. Jacob reached for the envelope with trembling hands. The paper crinkled loudly in the silent room as he carefully broke the seal. Emily watched, barely breathing, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Time seemed to stand still as Jacob unfolded the papers inside. His eyes scanned the text, moving back and forth rapidly. Suddenly, his hand flew to his mouth, and tears welled up in his eyes. "Emily," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You were telling the truth. You're my daughter. You're really my daughter." Emily sat frozen for a moment, unable to process the words. Then, as understanding dawned, tears began streaming down her face. Jacob pushed back his chair and crossed the room in 3 quick strides, pulling her into a tight embrace. "I have a daddy," Emily sobbed into his chest, her words muffled but clear. "I finally have a daddy." Jacob stroked her hair, his own tears falling freely now. "Yes, sweetheart, you do. And I have a daughter, my beautiful, precious daughter." That evening, the usually quiet mansion buzzed with activity. Jacob had invited his closest staff members, Thompson, Mrs. Chun the cook, Sarah the housekeeper, and James the groundskeeper, along with a handful of his oldest friends. The dining room glowed warmly, filled with the aroma of Mrs. Chun's finest dishes. As everyone gathered around the long table, Jacob stood, gently pulling Emily to her feet beside him. "I'd like you all to meet someone very special," he announced, his voice ringing with pride. "This is my daughter, Emily Grace Whitfield." The room erupted in applause and congratulations. Mrs. Chen wiped tears from her eyes with her apron, while Thompson's usual reserve cracked into a broad smile. Emily blushed but stood tall beside her father, her hand firmly held in his. For the first time in years, genuine laughter echoed through the mansion's halls. Stories were shared, glasses clinked in celebration, and the air filled with a joy that had long been absent from the grand old house. Emily moved from guest to guest, accepting hugs and well wishes, while Jacob watched with a heart so full it felt like it might burst. The grand ballroom of Jacob's mansion sparkled under crystal chandeliers as guests in their finest attire filtered through the ornate double doors. Thompson and the staff had outdone themselves, transforming the usually quiet space into a scene of elegance with white tablecloths, fine china, and fresh flower arrangements centering each table. Emily stood nervously at the top of the grand staircase, wearing a new powder blue dress that made her eyes shine. Her hands smoothed the fabric repeatedly as she watched the growing crowd below. The dress had been carefully chosen to make her feel beautiful and confident, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel the need to hide. "Ready, sweetheart?" Jacob appeared beside her, looking distinguished in his dark suit. His eyes held a mixture of pride and protectiveness as he offered his arm. "I think so," Emily whispered, linking her arm through his. Together, they descended the stairs as heads turned and whispers rippled through the gathering. Jacob clinked his glass with a spoon, calling for attention. The crowd of business associates, community leaders, and townsfolk hushed, their faces expectant. He cleared his throat, one hand resting protectively on Emily's shoulder. "Friends, colleagues, neighbors, thank you for joining us tonight. I've gathered you here because I have an important announcement." His voice grew stronger with each word. "Many of you have noticed changes at the mansion lately. Tonight, I'm proud to introduce you to my daughter, Emily Grace Whitfield." A collective gasp swept through the room, followed by stunned silence. Emily felt her cheeks flush as all eyes turned to her, but she stood straighter, drawing strength from Jacob's steady presence. The DNA results confirmed what my heart already knew, Jacob continued, his voice thick with emotion. Emily is my daughter, and I couldn't be more blessed. To Emily's surprise, applause broke out, led by Thompson and several longtime staff members who had witnessed the transformation in both father and daughter over the past weeks. Soon, most of the crowd joined in, their faces warming with genuine smiles. Throughout the evening, Emily found herself surrounded by well-wishers. Some of the younger guests even invited her to join their table, making her feel truly welcome for the first time in her life. During a quiet moment, Emily slipped away to a corner with her ever-present sketchbook. Her pencil moved swiftly across the paper as she captured the scene before her, herself and Jacob, both smiling, their happiness evident in every line. She added subtle details, his protective stance, her new confidence, the way they seemed to belong together. As the party wound down, Emily approached Jacob, who was bidding farewell to some business partners. She shyly held out the sketch, watching his face as he took it in. His eyes misted over as he studied the drawing, touching the paper gently as if it might disappear. Emily, this is... He pulled her into a tight hug, the sketch held carefully in one hand. I'll treasure this always, he whispered, and Emily knew he meant it. The morning sun filtered through the study windows as Jacob's hands trembled, holding the newspaper. His face darkened as he read the headlines. The Millbrook Herald's front page showed a photo from last night's banquet, but the words beneath it made his stomach turn. Whitfield's lost daughter, the weighty truth. Other papers weren't any kinder. Rich man's heavy burden, mocked one tabloid. Big secret revealed at Whitfield Mansion, jeered another. Jacob's jaw clenched as he read the cruel comments about Emily's appearance scattered throughout the articles. Emily walked into the study, still in her pajamas, and Jacob quickly tried to hide the papers. But she had already seen them. Her eyes welled with tears as she picked up one that had fallen to the floor. They're being mean about me, aren't they? She whispered, her voice breaking. Before Jacob could comfort her, Thompson appeared at the door, looking concerned. Sir, there are some people at the gate insisting on seeing you. They claim to be Emily's former foster parents. Emily's face went pale. The Fosters? No, please, don't let them in. But it was too late. Mr. and Mrs. Foster had already pushed their way past security, their faces twisted with fake concern as they burst into the study. Mrs. Foster, wearing an ill-fitting floral dress, immediately rushed toward Emily. Double quotes. Oh, our poor dear. We've been so worried. She reached for Emily, who shrank back against Jacob. What do you want? Jacob demanded, stepping between them and Emily. Mr. Foster, a thin man with greedy eyes, pulled out some papers. We're filing for custody. We raised Emily for years while you abandoned her. Now that she's worth something to you, you suddenly want to play daddy? That's not true. Emily cried out, but the Fosters had already begun their campaign of lies. By Sunday, rumors were swirling through town. At church, Emily heard the whispers as she walked down the aisle with Jacob. I heard he's just using her for publicity, one woman muttered. Did you hear what the foster parents said? Apparently, he knew about her all along. Such a shame, making that poor girl a spectacle. The whispers grew louder until Emily couldn't take it anymore. She ran from the pew, tears streaming down her face, and collapsed in the church vestibule. Jacob found her there, curled up on a wooden bench, her body shaking with sobs. That night, after Jacob had finally coaxed her home and tucked her into bed, Emily lay awake, listening to the big house creak and settle. The cruel words from the newspapers and church echoed in her mind. The Fosters' threats loomed large in her thoughts. 3:00 in the morning, Emily quietly slipped out of bed. Her hands shook as she packed a small backpack with some clothes and her sketchbook. She couldn't let Jacob lose his reputation because of her. She couldn't bear to see him hurt by the Fosters' lies. Tiptoeing down the grand staircase, Emily paused at Jacob's study door. She slipped her latest drawing, the one of them together at the banquet, under the door. Then, using the key she'd seen Thompson hide for emergencies, she unlocked the side door and slipped out into the dark night. First rays of dawn crept through the mansion windows as Jacob stirred from a restless sleep. Something felt wrong. The house was too quiet, too still. He pushed himself up from his bed, his joints protesting as he hurried down the hallway to Emily's room. "Emily?" he called softly, knocking on her door. No answer. His heart began to race as he opened it, finding the bed empty and neatly made. A piece of paper lay on the pillow. With shaking hands, he picked it up, reading the words written in Emily's careful handwriting. "I'm sorry for causing so much trouble. You deserve better." "No, no, no," Jacob muttered, rushing through the house. He checked the kitchen, the library, the garden, all empty. Panic gripped his chest as he burst into the security room, startling the night guard. "Show me the footage," he demanded, leaning over the monitors. The guard rewound the tapes, and there she was, Emily, carrying a small backpack, slipping out through the side gate at 2 o'clock in the morning. The sight of her lonely figure disappearing into the darkness broke his heart. Jacob grabbed his car keys, not bothering to change out of his pajamas. As he drove through the empty streets, memories of Grace flooded his mind. 25 years ago, he'd let pride and fear keep him from following her when she left. He'd convinced himself it was better that way, safer for his heart. "I was such a fool," he whispered, scanning the sidewalks desperately. The image of Grace's face, so similar to Emily's, haunted him. He'd lost them both the same way, through his own failure to act, to fight, to show them how much he cared. "Not this time," he declared firmly, turning down another street. "I won't lose you too, Emily. I can't lose another daughter." For 3 hours, he searched every place he could think of. The park where they'd walked together, the diner where they'd shared meals, the art supply store she loved. Each empty location increased his desperation. The sun climbed higher in the sky, but Jacob refused to give up. Finally, exhausted and heartsick, he returned to his study. His legs gave out as the weight of his fear crushed him. He fell to his knees beside his desk, clasping his hands together. "Please," he prayed aloud, his voice breaking. "Please help me find her. I can't fail her like I failed Grace. Give me strength to bring my daughter home. She's all I have left." Tears rolled down his cheeks as he remained there, kneeling, his whispered prayers filling the empty room. Emily huddled on a wooden bench in the far corner of Patterson Park, her sketchbook balanced on her knees. Tears blurred her vision as she tried to draw, but the lines came out wobbly and uncertain, just like she felt inside. The morning joggers who passed by either stared or quickly looked away, making her feel even more like an outcast. "Why did I ever think I could belong?" she whispered, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. The cruel headlines from the newspaper danced in her mind. "Millionaire's lost daughter. A heavy burden?" She pressed her pencil harder against the paper, trying to drown out the memory of whispered comments at church. The sun climbed higher in the sky as she sketched mindlessly, drawing the same scene over and over. A little girl standing outside iron gates, alone. Her shoulders shook with quiet sobs. Suddenly, a familiar shadow fell across her page. Emily looked up to find Jacob kneeling beside her bench, his face etched with concern and relief. He was still in his pajamas, his silver hair uncombed. "Emily," he said softly, "I've been searching everywhere for you." She dropped her gaze back to her sketchbook. "I'm just causing you trouble. Everyone's talking about how I'm ruining your reputation." Jacob gently placed his hand over hers. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have protected you better from their cruelty. I should have seen how much you were hurting." "But they're right," Emily whispered. "Look at me. I'm not the kind of daughter someone like you should have. I'm not worthy of—" "Stop," Jacob interrupted, pulling her into a tight embrace. "You are priceless to me, Emily Grace Whitfield. You are my daughter, and you are loved beyond measure." Those people who mock you. They're the ones who are unworthy. Emily buried her face in his shoulder, letting out all the pain she'd been holding inside. Jacob held her close, stroking her hair as she cried. When her tears finally subsided, Jacob stood and held out his hand. "Let's go home, sweetheart." Emily hesitated for just a moment before taking it. As they walked hand in hand toward his car, Jacob squeezed her fingers gently. "I promise you this," he said firmly. "From now on, you'll never have to face their cruelty alone. We're in this together." The county courthouse loomed before them, its stone steps well worn from decades of footsteps seeking justice. Emily gripped Jacob's hand as they climbed those steps together, her other hand clutching her familiar sketchbook like a shield. Inside the courtroom, polished wooden benches creaked as people settled in. Emily's former foster parents sat at the plaintiff's table, perfectly groomed and wearing expressions of wounded concern that made Emily's stomach twist. Their lawyer, Mr. Patterson, rose to his feet, his expensive suit matching his calculated smile. "Your Honor," he began, "this case is about a vulnerable child being manipulated by a wealthy man. Mr. Whitfield has coached this impressionable young girl, feeding her stories about being his long-lost daughter to satisfy his own needs." Emily felt Jacob tense beside her as Patterson continued painting her as a conniving gold digger, suggesting she had fabricated the entire story for financial gain. The foster parents nodded along, dabbing at their eyes with handkerchiefs. Witnesses took the stand one after another. The foster parents' neighbors testified about Emily's difficult behavior and attention-seeking. But then came Jacob's staff, the chef who spoke of Emily's gentle kindness, the art teacher who praised her dedication, the security guard who described finding her that first night at the gate. When Jacob took the stand, his voice carried across the hushed courtroom. "I made terrible mistakes in my youth," he admitted, his eyes finding Emily's. "I let Grace, Emily's mother, slip away because I was selfish, focused only on building my fortune. But Emily," his voice caught, "Emily is my second chance. The DNA test proves she's my daughter, but more than that, she's taught me what really matters in life." Finally, Emily herself approached the witness stand. Her legs shook, but her voice remained steady as she spoke. "These people," she gestured to her former foster parents, "never saw me as anything but a paycheck. But Jacob, my father, he sees me, really sees me. For the first time in my life, I'm not just the fat girl nobody wants. I'm loved. I'm home." The courtroom fell silent, moved by the raw honesty in her words. Several jurors wiped away tears, and even the judge's stern expression softened as Emily described finally finding acceptance and dignity with Jacob. After a brief recess, the judge returned to the courtroom, his expression solemn but warm. The room fell silent as he adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. Having carefully considered all testimony and evidence presented, including the verified DNA test results and character witnesses from both sides, this court grants full legal and physical custody of Emily Grace to her biological father, Jacob Whitfield, effective immediately. The foster parents leaped to their feet, faces contorted with rage. "This is outrageous!" the foster mother shrieked, grabbing her purse. "We'll appeal." They stormed down the aisle and slammed the heavy wooden doors behind them. A soft wave of applause rippled through the courtroom. Jacob turned to Emily, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close as his shoulders shook with emotion. "My daughter," he whispered. "Finally, truly my daughter." Emily buried her face in his chest, her own tears soaking his suit jacket. "Daddy," she said, the word full of joy and wonder. Reporters who had been covering the case began scribbling furiously in their notepads. The story was shifting before their eyes, from one of suspicion about a wealthy man's motives to a touching tale of redemption and reunion. Cameras flashed as father and daughter embraced, capturing the moment of pure love and victory. That evening, the mansion blazed with warmth and light. Close friends gathered in the grand dining room, where the chef had prepared Emily's favorite dishes. Laughter rang through the usually quiet halls as Emily showed her latest sketches to admiring guests. Jacob watched from his chair, his face glowing with pride as Emily moved confidently among their friends. Finally at home where she belonged. 2 weeks after the court victory, the morning sun caught the edges of a freshly installed brass plaque at the mansion's entrance. Workers had just finished mounting it, and Emily watched from behind the curtains of her bedroom window, her heart full of excitement and purpose. The gardens had been transformed for the dedication ceremony. White chairs lined the driveway, and colorful banners fluttered in the spring breeze. Local officials, community leaders, and families gathered as Jacob stood at a small podium, his voice strong with emotion. "This place was once just a house where I lived alone," Jacob began, gesturing to the mansion behind him. "But through the gift of love and family, it became a true home. Today, we dedicate the Whitfield Foster Children's Foundation, a place where children like Emily can find hope, healing, and belonging." Emily stepped forward, her new confidence evident in her posture. Gone was the frightened girl who had once huddled against these very gates. In her place stood a young woman who had found her voice. "When I first came here," Emily shared with the crowd, her voice clear and steady, "I thought I was worth nothing. But love changed everything. Now I want to help other kids know they're valuable too." In the following months, Emily visited local schools, sharing her story with other children. She spoke about bullying, self-worth, and the power of perseverance. Students listened intently as she showed them her sketchbook, explaining how art had helped her express her feelings when words failed. The community, once divided in their opinions, rallied around the foundation. Local businesses donated supplies for art programs. Teachers referred struggling students for mentoring. The mansion's halls filled with the sounds of children's laughter during weekend workshops. Jacob watched his daughter bloom in her role as youth ambassador. Her natural empathy and creativity touched hearts everywhere she went. When a local newspaper featured her story, the headline read, "Former foster child becomes beacon of hope." One evening, as the sun began to set, Jacob and Emily walked hand in hand through the gates where their story had begun. They paused to read the gleaming plaque that now marked the entrance. "Home is where love finds you." If this story made you pause, reflect, or even smile, don't forget to subscribe. I post daily, and the next story might be exactly what you need to hear.